The day before my brother's lavish engagement party, my mother shoved a crumpled $50 bill into my chest and told me to turn around. She looked me in the eye and said they could not risk a college dropout humiliating the family in front of his wealthy new in-laws. She bragged that his fiancé was a high-powered corporate executive. What my mother did not realize in that moment was that I already knew the bride to be very well. In fact, I was the chief executive officer of the company where she worked. I was her boss. But I did not say a word. I simply handed the money back, turned on my heel, and let them continue building their fragile house of cards, knowing I held the match that would burn it all down. My name is Riley. I am 33 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I was the disappointment of my family. I built a multi-million-dollar crisis management firm from the ground up, but to my parents, I was just the girl who quit college and wasted her potential. Before I dive into exactly how I exposed my family's lies and watched my brother lose everything on the biggest night of his life, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you have ever been treated like the black sheep by people who secretly relied on your strength. It was a crisp Friday evening in Manhattan when I arrived at the Waldorf Astoria. The air inside the grand lobby smelled of expensive lilies and old money. My brother Connor, who had just turned 30, was hosting his pre-engagement dinner in one of the private dining suites. I was wearing a simple but elegant black dress, holding a velvet box containing a vintage set of crystal whiskey glasses I had spent weeks tracking down for him. I knew my family dynamics were strained, but I still believed in showing up. I still thought that maybe, just maybe, celebrating this milestone would bridge the gap between us. I walked across the polished marble floors, mentally preparing myself for the usual passive-aggressive comments from my relatives. I spotted the gold-lettered sign pointing toward the private suite. Before I could even reach the heavy oak doors, a hand clamped down hard on my forearm. The grip was sharp and familiar. I turned to see my mother Diane, her face tight with panic and disapproval. She was 58 but spent a fortune trying to look 40, wrapped in a shimmering silver gown that probably cost more than my first car. She did not say hello. She did not ask how I was doing. Instead, she yanked me violently into a secluded alcove near the coat check, her eyes darting around to make sure none of the wealthy guests had seen us. "What are you doing here, Riley?" she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. Her grip on my arm tightened as she looked me up and down, her nose wrinkling as if my very presence offended her. I looked at her confused. "I am here for Connor," I replied softly, holding up the wrapped velvet box. "I am his sister." Mom let go of my arm. She snatched the box out of my hands, shoved it onto a nearby side table, and unclasped her designer purse. Her fingers trembled with frantic energy as she pulled out a $50 bill and shoved it aggressively against my chest. "Take this and go find a cab." She ordered, her tone colder than the winter wind outside. "You are not coming inside." Connor's fiancée comes from an incredibly successful family. Jasmine is a brilliant woman and her parents are flying in from Atlanta. They are distinguished, highly educated people. We are not going to embarrass ourselves by parading you around. I stood there, the $50 bill fluttering to the carpeted floor between us. I asked her exactly how my presence would be an embarrassment. Diane scoffed, crossing her arms. "Oh, please, Riley. You do freelance public relations from your tiny apartment. You dropped out of a decent university to do what, type emails for local businesses all day? Connor is launching a tech startup. He is going to be a millionaire. He is marrying a woman who actually made something of herself. I will not have you sitting at that table answering their questions about your career and making us look like we raised a failure. Just leave. Go home. Do not ruin this for him." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. A few years ago, a speech like that would have shattered me. I would have run to the bathroom, cried my eyes out, and wondered why I was never good enough for the woman who gave birth to me. But standing there at 33, as the founder of one of the most ruthless crisis management firms in New York, I felt absolutely nothing. No tears blurred my vision, no lump formed in my throat. I just looked at the woman who had drained my college savings to buy Connor a sports car 10 years ago, realizing she had not changed one bit. She was still desperately trying to buy a status she did not earn. I calmly bent down, picked up the $50 bill, and smoothed out the creases. I reached over and tucked the money gently into the front pocket of my mother's silver evening bag. "Keep it, Diane," I said, my voice completely steady and void of any emotion. "It sounds like you are going to need every penny to keep up this charade." I did not wait for her response. I did not look back at the private suite or ask about my brother. I simply turned around and walked out of the Waldorf Astoria, leaving my velvet box on the table. As I stepped out into the cool New York night, I took a deep breath of fresh air. My mother thought she was protecting her golden boy from a humiliating truth. She had no idea that the real humiliation had not even begun. I slipped into the back of the sleek black car waiting at the curb. City lights blurred through the tinted windows as we headed downtown toward my penthouse in Tribeca. I leaned my head against the cool leather seat, ready to put the night behind me. Toxic families do not let you walk away that easily. They need you to play the villain so they can remain the victims. Immediately, my phone screen illuminated the dark back seat. The rapid succession of chimes signaled that my mother had already spun her web. I picked up the device and saw a flood of messages in the extended family group chat. My father, who had not called me in 4 months, was the first to attack. "I cannot believe you caused a scene at the Waldorf," his text read. "Your mother is in tears in the restroom. Why do you always try to ruin your brother's big moments? You knew tonight was about Connor and Jasmine. You just could not stand seeing him succeed, could you? Just stay away from us until you learn how to behave." I stared at the glowing screen in utter disbelief. I had not spoken above a whisper. I had not caused a scene. I had literally been shoved into a hallway and handed cash like a panhandler. But in their twisted, fabricated reality, my mere existence was an act of aggression. Then came my Aunt Susan, my mother's sister and her most loyal enforcer. "Riley, you really need to let go of this jealousy," she typed. "We all know you are still bitter about the past. Connor is a visionary. He needed that seed money to project the right image to investors. You were just going to community college anyway. Grow up and stop punishing him for having a real future." That text made my blood run ice cold. Seed money. Project the right image. That was their polite family code for the ultimate betrayal. 10 years ago, when I was 23 and working 2 jobs to pay for my undergraduate classes, I went to the bank to check the college fund my late grandfather had left for me. I needed to pay my tuition for the upcoming semester. Instead, the teller informed me the account had been emptied. My mother, who had been named the custodian of the account, had drained all $60,000 of my inheritance. When I confronted her, she did not even blink. She told me Connor needed a Porsche to drive to his tech networking events. She said a young entrepreneur has to look successful to attract venture capital, and since I was only studying communications, my education was not a priority. They literally stole my future to buy my brother a shiny toy. And when I had to drop out, because I could not afford the tuition, they branded me a failure. Now, sitting in the back of my chauffeured car, I read those texts and felt a dangerous calm wash over me. I did not type a frantic paragraph defending myself. I did not point out that my mother was the one who assaulted me in the hallway. Explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you is a waste of time. I simply took a screenshot of their messages and saved it to a secure folder on my phone. My father sent another message. "If you want to make this right, you can wire a contribution for the wedding. Do not be selfish." I locked the screen and tossed the phone onto the seat next to me. They were so utterly convinced of their own delusions. They believed Connor was on the verge of becoming the next tech billionaire, and they believed I was a struggling freelancer desperate for their scraps. The sheer audacity of asking me to fund the wedding of the brother who stole my education was laughable. They wanted me to finance the illusion that destroyed my own youth. As the car pulled up to my building, the doorman greeted me with a respectful nod. I stepped out into the crisp air, looking up at the illuminated windows of my penthouse. I had built a life they could not even comprehend. I did not just survive their theft. I used the rage it gave me to build an empire of my own. My phone buzzed one last time. It was a direct message from Connor himself. "Thanks for staying away tonight, loser. Jasmine's parents would have been horrified by you. Keep playing small." I smiled as the private elevator doors closed, whisking me up to my quiet sanctuary. "Keep playing small," he said. I was the chief executive officer of the firm, holding his entire fake career in its hands. Tomorrow morning, Connor would walk into my corporate lobby, looking for a financial lifeline, completely unaware that he was stepping straight into the lion's den. The following morning, the sun reflected brilliantly off the glass-walled headquarters of Apex Crisis Management. Walking through the sweeping double doors, I did not look like the pathetic dropout my family imagined. I wore a tailored navy suit, my heels clicking with authority against the pristine Italian marble floor. Employees nodded respectfully as I passed. I was not a freelancer struggling to pay rent. I was the founder and chief executive officer of a firm that handled multi-million-dollar public relations disasters for Wall Street elites and Fortune 500 companies. I had built this empire from scratch, fueled by the relentless drive to prove my mother wrong. As I settled into my spacious corner office overlooking the city skyline, my mind drifted back to the late-night phone call I received just hours prior. I had barely poured myself a glass of wine in my penthouse when my phone buzzed. It was Jasmine, my brilliant 29-year-old chief operating officer. Jasmine was a self-made African-American executive with a mind like a steel trap. She had fought tooth and nail for her position in the corporate world, overcoming countless obstacles to become my most trusted right-hand woman. We had built Apex together over the last 5 years, sharing a bond that went far beyond business. When I answered the call, Jasmine sounded utterly exhausted. "I am so sorry to bother you this late, Riley," she sighed, her voice tight with frustration. "But I just survived the most excruciating dinner of my entire life, and I needed to vent to someone who understands the insanity of pretentious people." I smiled, leaning back against my kitchen counter. "Tell me everything," I said. I assumed she was talking about a difficult client meeting. "It was a pre-engagement dinner with my fiancé's family," she explained. Jasmine had recently gotten engaged to a tech entrepreneur she had been dating for about a year. I had not met him yet as my travel schedule had been brutal, and she preferred to keep her personal life private until things were serious. "They are just so incredibly toxic, Riley." His mother spent the entire evening bragging about their social status and talking down to the waitstaff. She kept boasting about how her son is going to be the next tech billionaire. The worst part is how they treat his sister. My breath caught slightly in my throat, though I brushed it off as a strange coincidence. "What do you mean?" I asked, taking a slow sip of my wine. Jasmine groaned. "Apparently his older sister is some sort of massive disappointment. They refused to even let her attend the dinner tonight. The mother literally bragged about turning her away at the door because she is a college dropout who does low-level freelance work. They act like she is a disease they might catch." I sat there listening to them tear this poor woman apart, and it made my skin crawl. It was so mean-spirited. I almost walked out. I just cannot stand people who punch down to make themselves feel taller. Sitting alone in my kitchen, a surreal chill had washed over me. I had listened to Jasmine describe the exact nightmare I had just lived through, yet neither of us realized the connection. In a city of 8 million people, the odds seemed impossible. I simply offered her my sympathy, telling her that she was marrying the man, not his toxic relatives, and advised her to set firm boundaries early on. We ended the call with a laugh, promising to catch up on office matters in the morning. Now sitting at my expansive mahogany desk in the bright light of day, I pulled up my email inbox to review the daily agenda. Jasmine walked into my office a few minutes later, holding 2 cups of artisanal coffee and a thick manila folder. She looked impeccably sharp in a cream-colored blazer, though the faint dark circles under her eyes proved her exhausting night was real. "Good morning, boss," Jasmine said, handing me a coffee. "Thanks for listening to me complain last night. I am officially putting family drama in a box and focusing on work. We have a massive opportunity on the table today. I took a slow sip of the coffee. What do we have? I asked, shifting into executive mode. Jasmine dropped the manila folder onto my desk. A new tech startup is looking for a massive reputation washing campaign before they announce their Series B funding round. The founder is coming in this morning to pitch us personally. He is desperate for high-end representation to attract venture capitalists. I slowly opened the folder, completely unaware of the storm that was about to hit. I spread the documents across my mahogany desk. The company was listed under the name Horizon Dynamics, a generic tech moniker, telling me nothing about what they actually produced. Jasmine stood across from me, watching me scan the executive summary. The startup was ostensibly developing an artificial intelligence platform for logistics management. They were seeking our premium-tier public relations package to clean up their digital footprint ahead of a massive Series B funding round. On the surface, it looked like a lucrative contract. But in crisis management, you learn to look past the glossy cover and hunt for the rot underneath. Look at the projected third-quarter revenue, Jasmine said, tapping a manicured finger on the spreadsheet. They claim 400% monthly user growth. But if you flip to the marketing expenditure on page 4, they have spent less than $5,000 on customer acquisition. You do not generate organic growth of that magnitude in the highly competitive logistics sector without a massive marketing blitz or a revolutionary patent. They have neither. It is mathematically impossible. I turned the page, my brow furrowing as I examined their monthly burn rate. Jasmine was exactly right. The numbers were not just inflated. They were entirely fabricated. A tech startup seeking Series B funding needs a clear paper trail of active beta testers, verified corporate partnerships, and rigorously audited financial statements. Horizon Dynamics had none of those crucial elements. Instead, they presented a flashy pitch deck full of empty buzzwords, impossible promises, and suspiciously large fund allocations directed toward vaguely defined consulting fees. "This is not a business plan," I said, leaning back in my leather chair. "This is a mirage built on pure arrogance. They are bleeding cash at a rate that would bankrupt any legitimate enterprise. Look closely at these expense reports from the last 2 quarters. Hundreds of thousands of dollars are funneled into luxury car leases, extravagant corporate retreats, and unverified offshore vendor accounts. There is no substantial investment in research and development. They are funding a lavish lifestyle on their initial investors' dimes. Why do they even want our firm involved?" A company this inherently fraudulent usually avoids top-tier public relations agencies. They know we do the ruthless due diligence that exposes these lies. Jasmine nodded slowly, her expression hardening as she pulled up an encrypted document on her tablet. "Because they are desperate and running out of time," she explained. "They have a massive pitch gala scheduled for next month, where they plan to secure tens of millions from Wall Street venture capitalists. But anonymous rumors have already started swirling in the tech blogs about their non-existent software code and a mysteriously high employee turnover rate. They know the walls are closing in. They do not want us to run a standard media campaign. They want to buy our credibility. If Apex takes them on as a client, it sends a powerful signal to the market. It tells investors that Horizon Dynamics has been thoroughly vetted and approved by the absolute best. They want to use our pristine reputation as a bulletproof shield to hide their scam." I let out a harsh laugh, tossing the fabricated financial summary back onto the desk. It was an old trick, but one I had seen a dozen times. A charismatic founder sells a fake dream to naive investors, runs out of cash, and then tries to leverage a reputable agency to trick bigger fish into keeping the Ponzi scheme alive. "We do not rent out our integrity," I told Jasmine firmly, meeting her gaze. "We clean up honest mistakes for legitimate companies. We absolutely do not provide cover for financial criminals looking for their next massive payout." "I completely agree," Jasmine replied, organizing the files into a neat pile. "I have already drafted a formal rejection letter. But the founder is incredibly persistent. He has been calling our front desk twice a day for the past week, aggressively name-dropping every connection he has in the industry. He insisted on coming in this morning to deliver the pitch in person. He genuinely thinks he can charm his way past the paperwork and manipulate us into signing a representation agreement. I told our lobby security to let him up so we can shut this down permanently. Good, I said, standing up and smoothing the front of my blazer. Let him come up to the executive floor. I want to look this guy right in the eye when I tell him we do not do business with arrogant con artists. I will hand this garbage back to him myself and ensure he never steps foot inside our building again. I grabbed the folder and walked toward the glass door, completely unaware that the fraudulent founder waiting downstairs was my own brother. Before heading downstairs, I stopped by my private suite. Someone had spilled a macchiato on my navy blazer earlier that morning during a brief hallway collision, so I had swapped it for an oversized beige cashmere sweater and dark designer jeans. In the high-stakes corporate world, true power is often walking into a room of tailored suits wearing comfortable clothes. I grabbed my private elevator keycard, swiped it, and began the smooth descent to the grand lobby. Meanwhile, on the ground floor, Connor was already making a spectacle of himself. As the elevator glided silently downward, the transparent glass walls allowed me to see the reception area below. A man in a flashy, ill-fitting designer suit was leaning heavily against the marble front desk. He was snapping his fingers at my head receptionist, David, a seasoned professional, who was maintaining a polite but visibly strained smile. I could not see the man's face yet, but his posture reeked of unearned entitlement. He was holding a leather briefcase like a prop, and loudly dictating instructions to David, acting as if he had just bought the entire building. I stepped out of the elevator as the steel doors parted with a soft chime. The lobby was expansive, echoing with the low hum of morning business. As I approached the front desk, the loud grating voice of the man finally registered in my ears. It was a voice I had heard whining for toys as a child, boasting about imaginary achievements as a teenager, and insulting me just last night at the Waldorf Astoria. I stopped dead in my tracks. It was Connor. He was aggressively tapping his expensive watch, which I now knew was funded by my mother's second mortgage. Listen to me very carefully, Connor barked at David, leaning over the marble counter. I do not have time to sit in your waiting area like some entry-level intern. I am the founder of Horizon Dynamics. We are about to close a $50 million funding round. More importantly, my fiancé is the chief operating officer of this agency. So I suggest you pick up that phone and tell Jasmine her future husband is here, or I will have your job before lunchtime. David, ever the professional, calmly tapped his keyboard. Sir, as I explained, our executive team is reviewing your file now. I cannot bypass protocol regardless of your personal connections. Connor scoffed, running a hand through his heavily gelled hair. Protocol is for poor people. I make the rules here. I took a slow, deep breath, letting the sheer absurdity of the moment wash over me. My brother, the golden boy, the tech genius, was standing in my lobby, threatening my staff and demanding special treatment by dropping the name of my best friend and second in command. The universe has a profound sense of humor. I took a few steps forward, the soft soles of my loafers making no sound on the marble floor. Connor, I said, my voice cutting through the echo of the massive room. He spun around, an arrogant smirk plastered across his face, fully expecting to see a terrified junior executive coming to grovel. When his eyes locked onto mine, the smirk vanished, instantly replaced by a look of profound confusion, followed immediately by fierce irritation. His gaze swept over my casual cashmere sweater and jeans, directly contrasting with his shiny, overly tailored suit. Riley, he barked, his voice echoing loudly enough to turn the heads of several passing employees. What in the world are you doing here? I held the manila folder containing his fraudulent business plan loosely at my side. I could ask you the same question, I replied evenly. Connor let out a loud, theatrical laugh that bounced off the high ceiling. He shook his head, pointing a finger at me as if I were a lost child. Unbelievable. Mom kicks you out of my dinner last night, so you decide to come downtown and stalk me. Are you really that desperate for attention? Or wait, let me guess. He paused, looking me up and down with exaggerated disgust. Did you finally decide to get a real job? Are you applying for the janitorial staff? Because let me tell you, even sweeping floors in a building like this requires a basic level of competence I am not sure you possess. I just stared at him, marveling at his absolute lack of self-awareness. You need to leave now, Connor demanded, stepping closer and lowering his voice to a vicious hiss. Get out before you embarrass me. My fiancée is the chief operating officer. She is a highly respected executive, and the last thing she needs is my pathetic dropout sister wandering around her lobby begging for a paycheck. I did not flinch or take a step back. I just looked at my brother, watching the veins pop in his neck as he desperately tried to protect his fragile facade. He was so terrified of being exposed as a fraud that he was projecting all his insecurities onto me. Before I could respond to his ridiculous threat, the heavy frosted glass doors of the main executive boardroom swung open. Jasmine walked out into the lobby. She looked immaculate in her cream-colored blazer, holding a sleek silver tablet radiating the quiet authority that made her such a phenomenal chief operating officer. She was reviewing some digital notes, her focus completely absorbed by the work, unaware of the explosive family reunion happening just 50 feet away. Connor spotted her instantly. The vicious, sneering expression on his face vanished in a millisecond. It was replaced by a wide, charming, thoroughly practiced smile. He straightened his tie, puffed out his chest, and transformed back into the confident tech founder he was pretending to be. Jasmine, baby, Connor called out, his voice suddenly loud and booming, clearly intended for the entire lobby to hear. Jasmine looked up from her tablet. A warm, genuine smile spread across her face as she saw her fiancé. But as she walked toward us, her eyes shifted from Connor to me, standing just a few feet away. I could see the slight confusion form on her features, wondering why the chief executive officer of the company was standing in the lobby, wearing jeans and a cashmere sweater, confronting her soon-to-be husband. Connor closed the distance between them. He wrapped his arms around her waist and leaned in to kiss her cheek. I missed you this morning, he said smoothly, playing the role of the loving partner perfectly. I came down to hand-deliver the Horizon Dynamics pitch file to your team, just like we talked about. I know how exclusive your agency is. Jasmine returned the greeting, but politely stepped back, maintaining her professional decorum in the workplace. It is good to see you, Connor, she said, her voice measured and calm. But what exactly is going on here? Why are you shouting? Connor let out a heavy, exasperated sigh and rolled his eyes, gesturing toward me as if I were a piece of trash someone had left on the pristine marble floor. Oh, I am so sorry about this, Jasmine. This is exactly why I hate coming downtown. My sister tracked me down here. I cannot escape her. Jasmine frowned, her sharp eyes darting between us. Your sister? She asked, the gears in her mind clearly starting to turn. Yes. My pathetic sister. Connor scoffed, crossing his arms and glaring at me with unfiltered malice. The one my mother told you about last night at the dinner. The one we had to turn away from the Waldorf Astoria because she is a college dropout and a complete embarrassment to the family. She must have found out you work here and decided to come beg for a handout or a low-level job. She is obsessed with ruining my success. I stood perfectly still, watching Jasmine. I watched the exact moment the realization hit her. I saw the flash of recognition followed by profound shock, and finally a cold, hard clarity. The horrific family from the dinner. The toxic mother who bragged about kicking her own daughter out and giving her a $50 bill. The sister who was allegedly a hopeless failure. It all snapped into place in Jasmine's brilliant mind. Connor, completely oblivious to the seismic shift happening in the woman standing next to him, snapped his fingers in the air toward the reception desk. Anyway, babe, you are the chief operating officer here. Can you please use your authority to call building security and have them escort Riley out? She is causing a scene, and I do not want her ruining my reputation with your executive board before they even review my company. Jasmine did not move. She did not reach for her phone. She did not call for security. Instead, she took another deliberate step away from Connor, creating a visible physical distance between them. The warmth in her eyes was completely gone, replaced by the razor-sharp, calculating glare she used to dissect hostile corporate takeover bids. Connor, Jasmine said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerously calm register that echoed through the sudden silence of the lobby. Do you have absolutely any idea who you are talking to? Connor blinked, his confident smile faltering for the very first time. What do you mean? It is just Riley. She is nobody. Jasmine shook her head slowly, her expression a mix of disgust and absolute disbelief. No, Connor. She is not just Riley. And she is certainly not here looking for a janitorial job. Jasmine turned slightly, gesturing toward me with an open palm, commanding the respect of everyone in the room. This woman is my boss. Riley is the founder and the chief executive officer of Apex Crisis Management. She owns this entire multi-million-dollar agency. The silence that followed was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on the marble floor. Connor went completely pale. The blood drained from his face so fast he looked physically ill. His mouth fell open, but no sound came out. His eyes darted wildly around the grand, expensive lobby, up to the towering glass ceilings, over to the deferential receptionist, and finally back to me, the sister he had spent his entire life tearing down. The tech bro facade completely shattered, leaving behind nothing but a terrified little boy, realizing he had just insulted the one person holding the keys to his survival. I watched Connor struggle to breathe, his chest heaving under his expensive suit. His eyes darted frantically between Jasmine and me, waiting for someone to laugh and say it was all a bizarre prank. But nobody laughed or even smiled. Jasmine stood her ground, her posture rigid and her expression utterly unforgiving. I did not scream. I did not raise my voice or throw a tantrum the way my mother would have. True power does not need to shout. It simply acts. I stepped forward, breaking the heavy silence that had fallen over the grand lobby. I walked past my frozen brother and approached the marble reception desk. David, my head receptionist, immediately stood up straight and pushed the manila folder containing the Horizon Dynamics pitch deck across the counter toward me. I picked it up, feeling the heavy, expensive cardstock Connor had used to print his lies. I turned back to face him, holding his future in my hands. Connor was sweating now. Tiny beads of moisture glistened on his forehead under the bright, recessed lighting. He took a hesitant step toward Jasmine, reaching out a hand as if to plead with her, but she held up a single finger silently, ordering him to stop right where he was. I flipped open the thick folder. The glossy pages were filled with vibrant charts and empty corporate buzzwords. Let us take a look at this $50 million idea, I said, my voice projecting clearly across the room. On page 1 alone, you claim a proprietary algorithm that has already been beta tested by 2 Fortune 500 logistics companies, but you failed to list their names, which is a direct violation of federal disclosure regulations for soliciting venture capital. Connor swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. Riley, please, he whispered, finally finding his voice. We can talk about this upstairs. Just you and me. I ignored him and turned to the next page. On page 3, you list your user acquisition cost at a fraction of the industry standard, while simultaneously projecting a 400% revenue increase by the third quarter. I looked up from the document, meeting his terrified gaze. That is not just optimistic forecasting, Connor. That is intentional financial misrepresentation. And since you are using these fabricated numbers to solicit investments across state lines, you are venturing dangerously close to federal wire fraud. The few employees lingering in the expansive lobby murmured to each other in hushed tones. Jasmine crossed her arms, her jaw clenched so tightly a muscle twitched in her cheek. She was a brilliant executive, and hearing the man she loved exposed as a careless criminal was undoubtedly shattering her reality. But she did not interrupt me. She let me finish the execution. You came into my building. I continued, my tone dropping to a deadly chill. You threatened my staff. You tried to leverage my chief operating officer to bypass our security protocols, and you did all of this to submit a fraudulent business plan, hoping my agency would wash your reputation before your big gala next month. You thought you could use our pristine corporate standing as a shield for your Ponzi scheme. I closed the folder with a sharp snap that echoed like a gunshot. I looked at the golden boy of my family, the brother who had his sports car funded by my stolen education, the man who called me a failure just yesterday. My firm does not represent frauds, I said flatly. I turned around, walked behind the marble reception desk, and located the heavy-duty industrial shredder we used for confidential documents. I pressed the power button. The machine roared to life with a loud, grinding hum. Without a second thought, I dropped the entire Horizon Dynamics pitch deck into the feed slot. The heavy cardstock caught the blades, and the machine chewed through his fake $50 million empire, spitting it out as worthless ribbons of paper into the plastic bin below. I hit the power button again, finalizing the destruction. The shredder spun down to silence. I looked back at Connor. "Get out of my building," I commanded. Connor stared at the shredded paper, then back at me, and finally over at Jasmine. He opened his mouth to speak, to offer some desperate lie or flimsy excuse, but no words came. The sheer weight of his public humiliation crushed whatever arrogance he had left. His face flushed a dark, violent shade of red. He spun around, pushed roughly through the heavy glass revolving doors, and practically sprinted down the busy Manhattan sidewalk, disappearing into the morning crowd. Jasmine let out a long, shaky breath, her professional composure finally cracking just a fraction. She looked at me, her dark eyes filled with a mixture of sharp betrayal and profound realization. The battle lines were drawn. Jasmine and I retreated to my office, leaving the shredded remains of Connor's fake empire in the lobby bin. The revelation had hit Jasmine like a freight train, but she was a survivor. Instead of crying, she immediately locked down her personal accounts and began cross-referencing the data Connor had given us. We sat in silence for nearly 2 hours, combing through the financial discrepancies that proved my brother was attempting to orchestrate a massive federal crime. The silence was violently broken by the sharp ring of my private desk phone. It was David from reception. He sounded uncharacteristically panicked. He told me there was a woman downstairs screaming my name and threatening to call the police if I did not come down immediately. I knew exactly who it was. The golden boy had run home to his mother. I took the private elevator back down to the ground floor. The doors slid open to reveal a scene of absolute chaos. My mother, Diane, was standing in the center of the pristine marble lobby, pointing an accusatory finger at David. She was wearing a flamboyant emerald green pantsuit and clutching her designer handbag like a weapon. The moment she spotted me, her eyes flared with a toxic mix of desperation and unhinged fury. She did not look like a woman who had just discovered her son was a fraud. She looked like a woman who was furious that her personal ATM had stopped dispensing cash. "Riley," she screeched, her voice echoing off the glass walls. She stomped toward me, her heels clicking aggressively against the floor. "How dare you? How dare you humiliate your brother like that? You vindictive, jealous little brat. He came to you for help and you treated him like garbage." I stood my ground, keeping my voice low and dangerously calm. "He did not come to me for help, Diane. He came here to use my firm to cover up a Ponzi scheme. He is lying to investors, and he is lying to you." She waved her hand dismissively, completely ignoring the reality of the situation. "Oh, spare me your dramatic corporate nonsense," she snapped. "He is an entrepreneur. They all bend the rules to get started. You are just trying to sabotage him because you cannot stand that he is better than you. But you are going to fix this, right now." Diane reached into her oversized handbag and pulled out a crumpled copy of the Horizon Dynamics representation contract. She thrust it toward my chest, mirroring the exact motion she had used with the $50 bill the night before. "You are going to sign this," she demanded, her face turning a blotchy red. "And you are going to do it for free. You owe this family, Riley. We put a roof over your head for 18 years. If you really own this massive building, if you really have all this money you hid from us, then you need to start acting like a daughter. Connor needs this agency to secure his funding round. And since you clearly have millions sitting around, you need to pay for his $200,000 wedding. It is the least you can do after the stunt you pulled this morning." I stared at her, genuinely astounded by the sheer magnitude of her delusion. She was not apologizing. She was not ashamed. She was doubling down, demanding that I finance the very illusion that was destroying our family. I did not take the contract. I let it fall to the marble floor, joining the metaphorical ghosts of my shredded past. You are out of your mind, I said, my voice steady and unwavering. I do not owe you a single dime. You stole my college fund to buy him a sports car, and now you want me to pay for a wedding? He is funding with stolen money. The answer is no. It will always be no. Diane gasped, her face contorting with rage. She raised her hand as if she were going to slap me right there in the middle of my own corporate lobby. I did not flinch. I looked past her and gave a sharp nod to the two large security guards who had quietly positioned themselves behind her. Escort this woman off the premises, I ordered. If she steps foot inside this building again, call the police and have her arrested for trespassing. The guards stepped forward firmly, taking Diane by both arms. She shrieked, kicking her expensive heels and screaming curses at me as they dragged her toward the revolving doors. I stood completely still, my hands resting calmly at my sides, silently watching the toxic matriarch of my family being physically removed from my empire. She was finally gone for good. I turned away from the glass revolving doors, taking a slow, grounding breath as the lobby returned to its usual hushed efficiency. The adrenaline that had spiked during my mother's unhinged performance was beginning to fade, leaving behind a cold, sharp focus. I walked back to my elevator, swiped my card, and headed to the executive floor. I knew exactly who was waiting for me. Jasmine was sitting on the leather sofa in my office, staring blankly at the breathtaking view of the Manhattan skyline. A half-empty glass of water sat on the coffee table in front of her. When I walked in and gently closed the heavy oak door, she did not look up immediately. The shock of the morning was still settling over her shoulders like a heavy winter coat. She had just discovered that the charming tech entrepreneur she was planning to marry was not only a fraud, but the golden child of the toxic family she had rightfully criticized the night before. I walked over and took a seat in the armchair opposite her, giving her the space she needed to process the betrayal. I am so sorry, Jasmine, I said softly. I had no idea he was the man you were dating. If I had known, I would have warned you months ago. Jasmine finally turned to look at me. Her eyes were rimmed with red, but her posture remained perfectly straight. She was devastated, but her brilliant analytical mind was already fighting through the emotional wreckage. "It is not your fault, Riley," she replied, her voice steady but hollow. "He kept his family completely separate from my life until last night. He claimed his parents were just difficult and traditional. He spun this narrative that he was self-made, that he was protecting me from their judgment. But he was actually protecting his lies from my scrutiny." She picked up her water glass, took a small sip, and set it down with a decisive click. The professional chief operating officer inside her was taking the wheel. "I need to tell you something," she continued, leaning forward. "When you pointed out those federal compliance violations downstairs, it felt like a bucket of ice water waking me up from a deep sleep. Things have been bothering me for the past few weeks, but I ignored my gut instincts because I loved him." I nodded, waiting for her to elaborate. "What kind of things?" I asked. "His computer habits," Jasmine explained, her brow furrowing in anger. "A month ago, he told me he spilled coffee on his company laptop and it was in the shop for repairs. He asked if he could borrow my personal laptop in the evenings to finish up some coding. I trusted him. We live together. We share everything. But over the last 2 weeks, I would wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning, and he would still be glued to the screen in the dark. Whenever I walked into the room, he would frantically minimize whatever window was open. He claimed it was a surprise for the wedding, a digital photo montage or something romantic. I wanted to believe him. A cold knot formed in my stomach. "Jasmine, you have dual-factor authentication on your personal laptop, but it is linked to your corporate cloud access," I said, the implications rapidly forming in my mind. "Exactly," she replied, her voice dropping to an absolute whisper. "Riley, the numbers he presented in that Horizon Dynamics pitch deck, the specific venture capital firms he listed as potential investors, I recognized 3 of those firms. They are on our private encrypted VIP client roster. The silence in my office suddenly felt heavy and suffocating. If Connor had used Jasmine's credentials to access our proprietary network, he had committed a massive federal crime. He had stolen trade secrets to solicit funding for a fraudulent company. He was not just lying to our faces, he was actively robbing our firm to build his fake empire. We cannot let him know we suspect anything, I said, standing up and walking over to my desk. If he realizes we caught him, he will wipe the hard drives and destroy the evidence. We need to trap him. Jasmine stood up, her dark eyes flashing with a fierce, unforgiving determination. I am not going to be collateral damage in his pathetic Ponzi scheme. I want to run a complete stealth audit on my own network credentials. We will hire a private cybersecurity team to trace exactly what files were opened on my laptop, when they were copied, and where they were sent. We will build a bulletproof digital paper trail. I looked at my brilliant friend, feeling a surge of profound respect. Let us begin, I agreed. Jasmine and I stood silently behind the technician, watching lines of green code scroll rapidly across the dark monitors. Connor thought he was a tech genius, but his encryption software was commercially bought and easily bypassed by a professional. It took exactly 22 minutes for the digital locks to break and the security barriers to fall. When the root folders opened, the grand illusion of the golden child was completely stripped away. Jasmine immediately navigated to the source code directories for his logistics company. She clicked through the nested files, her highly trained eyes rapidly scanning the data architecture that was supposed to revolutionize the industry. A bitter, hollow laugh escaped her lips as the reality set in. There was absolutely no proprietary artificial intelligence algorithm. The files were entirely made up of basic open-source code copied directly from free internet developer forums. Connor had built a flashy user interface that did absolutely nothing behind the scenes. It was a complete digital ghost town. He was not a visionary entrepreneur. He was a common fraud wearing a very expensive designer suit. But the fake software was only the beginning of his deception. The technician ran a cross-reference search matching the specific timestamps from Jasmine's laptop logs to the files modified on Connor's drive. A hidden password-protected folder suddenly appeared on the screen, deceptively labeled under a mundane tax accounting title. When the technician forced it open, all the blood instantly drained from my face. It was a complete replica of the Apex Crisis Management exclusive VIP client database. Row after row of private contact information, personal net worth assessments, and highly confidential investment portfolios belonging to our top-tier venture capitalist clients. My brother had waited until Jasmine was fast asleep, logged into her secure corporate portal, using the credentials he secretly recorded and systematically downloaded our most guarded assets. He essentially robbed my company vault from his living room couch, using the woman he claimed to love as his unwitting accomplice. Jasmine leaned heavily against the mahogany conference table, her eyes tracking the outgoing email logs the technician had just uncovered. Connor had not just stolen the exclusive contact list. He was actively using it to solicit millions. The screen displayed dozens of tailored emails sent from an encrypted offshore server to the very investors we were sworn to protect. He was pitching his fake logistics company, attaching the forged financial documents we had shredded earlier that morning, and asking for massive capital injections. He was leveraging the prestigious names of our mutual contacts to build a false sense of security and trust. Because he was actively soliciting large sums of money across state lines using digital communications and fabricated financial statements, this escalated far beyond a simple family betrayal. He was committing textbook federal wire fraud. Every single email he sent was an independent federal offense, each carrying a potential sentence of up to 20 years in federal prison. I asked the technician to create 3 encrypted clones of the hard drive and generate a certified chain of custody report. As the progress bar filled on the glowing computer screens, I looked over at Jasmine. She was no longer looking at the stolen corporate data. She was staring straight ahead at the wall, a cold, calculating fire burning fiercely in her dark eyes. The man she was supposed to marry had truly used her as a literal Trojan horse. He deeply compromised her professional integrity and risked her executive career just to fuel his own delusions of grandeur. My mother had enabled this entitled monster, feeding his oversized ego until he genuinely believed the laws of reality simply did not apply to him. They thought they were completely untouchable because they had spent 30 years stepping on me without ever facing a single consequence. But they had just handed me the exact weapon I needed to absolutely destroy them. The stealth audit was officially complete. The irrefutable evidence was fully secured. It was time to let the golden boy hang himself. By the following afternoon, the silence from my family was finally broken, but not by an apology or a moment of reflection. When toxic people realize they can no longer control you, they will immediately try to control how others see you. I was sitting at my desk reviewing the chain of custody report from the cybersecurity contractor when my personal cell phone began vibrating violently against the mahogany surface. It was not just one call. It was a rapid succession of notifications, text messages, voicemails, and social media alerts flooding in so fast my screen froze. I picked up the phone, a heavy sense of dread settling in my stomach. The very first message was from my Aunt Susan. "You are a disgusting, greedy monster," it read. "Your grandfather would be ashamed to share blood with you. I hope you lose everything." I stared at the screen, my brow furrowing in confusion. In the span of 30 seconds, my cousin sent me a voicemail screaming that I was dead to her. My father sent a single chilling text saying I was no longer his daughter. I opened my social media applications, and the reason for the sudden onslaught became glaringly clear. Connor had posted a video, and Diane had shared it, tagging every single member of our extended family, friends, and local community members. I tapped the play button. The video opened with Connor sitting on the edge of a bed in his luxury apartment. His tie loosened, his hair strategically messy. He looked directly into the camera, his eyes red and brimming with unshed tears. He looked like the picture of absolute despair. Next to him sat my mother, clutching a tissue to her chest, her face pale and drawn. "I never thought it would come to this." Connor began, his voice shaking with perfectly practiced vulnerability. "I never thought my own flesh and blood would try to destroy me. For the past 2 years, I have poured my entire soul into building Horizon Dynamics. I have worked day and night, sacrificing everything to create software that could change the logistics industry. But yesterday, my sister Riley, who is the chief executive officer of a massive corporate agency, decided that my success was a threat to her." Diane leaned forward, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder, turning to face the camera. "She used her wealth and her corporate lawyers to corner him," Diane cried, her voice cracking. "She demanded that he sign over the rights to all his tech patents. When he refused to give up the company he built with his bare hands, she threw him out of her building and threatened to ruin his reputation. She is a corporate bully trying to steal her own brother's life work." Connor wiped a tear from his cheek. "She even manipulated my fiancée Jasmine, trying to turn her against me. I just want to build my company. I just want to make my family proud. But Riley will not stop until she takes everything I have. Please, if anyone out there knows how to fight a massive corporate entity, we need your help. We are just a normal family fighting a greedy billionaire." I paused the video, letting the sheer audacity of the lie wash over me. The tech patents he was crying about did not even exist. He had stolen free code from the internet. The so-called manipulation of his fiancée was actually his fiancée discovering he was a criminal, using her computer to commit federal fraud. But to the hundreds of people commenting on the video, his performance was flawless. He was the brilliant, hard-working underdog, and I was the ruthless, greedy corporate villain trying to steal his dream. My phone continued to buzz relentlessly. I was receiving messages from high school friends I had not spoken to in a decade, accusing me of being heartless. Some of the messages crossed the line from anger to direct threats. Someone I did not even know commented that I deserved to be physically dragged out of my penthouse and taught a lesson in humility. They were actively weaponizing the internet against me, hoping to intimidate me into silence or force me to hand over the representation contract to save my own public image. Jasmine walked into my office just as a particularly vicious voicemail from my uncle finished playing. She took one look at my face and then down at my phone. She pulled out her own phone, navigating to the video that was rapidly gaining traction. I watched her eyes widen as she listened to Connor's fabricated story. "This is unbelievable," Jasmine whispered, looking up at me. "He is actually trying to frame you for stealing the company that does not exist. He is using his own mother as a prop to garner sympathy." I locked my phone and placed it face down on the desk. "This is what cornered animals do, Jasmine," I said calmly. "They panic. They lash out. They try to rewrite the narrative before the truth can catch up to them. But they just made a fatal miscalculation." "What is that?" she asked, her voice steadying. "They brought this fight into the public arena," I replied. "They think public relations is just crying on camera and playing the victim. But I am a professional crisis manager. I destroy false narratives for a living. And now they have officially given me a reason to completely dismantle theirs." I turned my leather executive chair back to the computer monitors where the decrypted contents of Connor's encrypted hard drive were still being displayed in vivid detail. The social media circus was just a loud distraction, a desperate smokescreen designed to hide the real financial panic underneath. If Connor was truly willing to commit federal wire fraud to secure his funding, it meant his current well of cash had completely dried up. Jasmine pulled up a chair next to me, her fingers flying across her tablet as she cross-referenced his bank statements with the financial records we had extracted. "He has been living in a luxury penthouse, driving a leased Porsche, and buying custom Italian suits for 2 years," Jasmine noted, her eyes scanning the columns of numbers. "He told me he secured a silent angel investor early on. But looking at these incoming wire transfers, the money is not coming from a corporate venture capital firm. It is coming from a regional bank branch back in your hometown." My blood ran cold at the mention of my hometown. I leaned closer to the screen, tracing the routing numbers on the spreadsheet. "Pull up the origin details for those specific wire transfers," I instructed. The screen flickered for a fraction of a second before displaying the source of Connor's wealth. It was a checking account. The names attached to the account were Diane and Robert, my parents. Jasmine let out a sharp breath, realizing what we were looking at. "Your parents have been funding this entire illusion," she whispered. "They are a retired principal and a banking manager. They do not have the kind of liquid assets to finance a multi-million-dollar tech CEO lifestyle." "They absolutely do not," I replied, a sinking feeling in my chest. "Dig deeper into that specific bank account. Let us see exactly where the initial cash injection originated." Jasmine ran a reverse trace on the account history. A massive deposit of $500,000 had been made exactly 2 years ago, coinciding perfectly with the launch of Horizon Dynamics. The transfer description was labeled as a residential equity line of credit. I felt all the air leave the room. My parents lived in a sprawling 4-bedroom colonial house that had been passed down through my father's side of the family for 3 generations. It was fully paid off decades ago. It was their pride and joy, their ultimate status symbol in our affluent Connecticut suburb. Diane took out a massive second mortgage on the ancestral home, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She leveraged the only real asset they had left to fund his fake company. Jasmine brought up the loan agreement documents Connor had carelessly saved in his personal files. He had scanned the paperwork to use as proof of capital. The terms of the loan were absolutely brutal. It was a high-interest, short-term predatory loan designed for desperate borrowers. "Look at the repayment schedule," Jasmine pointed to the bottom of the document. "The grace period ended last month. A balloon payment of nearly $100,000 is due in exactly 30 days. If they default, the bank will initiate immediate foreclosure proceedings." The reality of the situation hit me with the force of a physical blow. My mother had not just favored my brother. She had bet her entire existence on his lies. She had stolen my $60,000 college fund 10 years ago, and when that ran out, she secretly mortgaged the family legacy to keep his delusion alive. If Connor did not secure tens of millions of dollars at his investment gala next month, the house of cards would violently collapse. Diane and my father would be completely bankrupt and thrown out onto the street in exactly 30 days. They would be entirely homeless. This is why she was so unhinged in my lobby this morning. I realized aloud, the pieces finally snapping together perfectly. This is why she demanded I sign the representation contract and pay for his wedding. She knows they are completely out of money. She thought she could bully me into saving them before the bank takes the house. She is terrified. Jasmine looked at me, the anger in her eyes softening into something resembling pity for the sheer stupidity of the situation. They built a bomb, handed it to Connor, and now they are blaming you because the timer is running out, she said. I stared at the financial ruin displayed on the bright monitors. They had dug their own graves entirely out of pride and a toxic need to maintain appearances. They wanted me to be the ultimate villain. I decided it was time to give them exactly what they asked for today. That evening, the doorbell of my Tribeca penthouse echoed softly through the high ceilings. I glanced at the security monitor. Connor was standing in the hallway looking completely pathetic. He was no longer wearing his arrogant tech founder suit. He had deliberately chosen a faded college sweatshirt and jeans, carrying a brown paper bag that held what looked like a remarkably cheap bottle of wine. He was trying to look humble, relatable, and defeated. He was playing the role of the prodigal son returning to the successful sister he had wronged. But I knew exactly what he was. He was a desperate man staring down the barrel of a 30-day foreclosure on his parents' house, willing to say absolutely anything to secure my signature on that representation contract. I pressed the intercom button and buzzed him in. When I opened the heavy oak door, Connor offered a weak, wavering smile. He held out the paper bag like a peace offering. "I know I do not deserve to be here," he began, his voice thick with rehearsed emotion. "I know what I did this morning was completely out of line. I was stressed, Riley. I have been under so much pressure with this startup, and I took it out on you. Can I please come in? We need to talk." I stepped aside, gesturing for him to enter. I led him into the expansive living room bathed in the soft ambient light of the city skyline. I did not offer him a glass for the wine. I simply crossed my arms and waited. Connor stood awkwardly by the massive leather sofa. "Riley, I am so sorry," he said, looking down at his shoes before meeting my eyes. "You have built an incredible life for yourself here. I was jealous. I have always been jealous. Mom and Dad always put so much pressure on me to succeed, to be the golden boy, and I felt like I was drowning. When I saw you at the Waldorf last night, I panicked. I felt inadequate. And then seeing you as the chief executive officer of Apex, it just broke me." I listened to him weave his narrative of victimhood, marveling at his sociopathic ability to center himself in every situation. He was not apologizing for his behavior. He was trying to excuse it by blaming our parents' expectations. He took a step closer, lowering his voice to a pleading whisper. "But I need you, Riley. The family needs you. Jasmine moved out of the apartment this afternoon. She will not even return my calls. I am losing everything. My investment gala is in exactly 4 weeks. It is the most important night of my life. If I do not have Apex representing me, the venture capitalists will tear me apart. Please do not do this to our family. Do not let your anger at me destroy Mom and Dad. You know how much they love me. If I fail, it will break their hearts." He was using family loyalty as a weapon, trying to guilt-trip me into submission. He had no idea that I already knew about the second mortgage. He thought he was playing a master class in emotional manipulation, unaware that he was standing in front of the one person who held his entire criminal record on a decrypted hard drive. I let a long, heavy silence stretch between us. I needed him to believe that his fake apology was actually working. I needed him to think that beneath my cold exterior, I was still just the desperate daughter seeking a way back into the family fold. I let out a soft sigh, relaxing my posture slightly. "You really hurt me, Connor," I said carefully, modulating my tone to sound conflicted. "The way you and Mom treated me at the hotel was unforgivable." "I know," he said quickly, his eyes lighting up with a flicker of hope. "I know it was. And I will spend the rest of my life making it up to you. Just give me this one chance to prove I can be a real success. Just sign the representation contract and come to the gala. Show the investors that my own sister believes in me." I looked at him, studying the desperate greed swimming just beneath the surface of his fake tears. He was so incredibly eager to steal more money. "Okay," I said softly. Connor practically stopped breathing. "Okay," he repeated, his voice cracking. "I will draft a preliminary agreement for Apex to represent Horizon Dynamics." I lied smoothly. "And I will attend your investment gala. But Connor, if I put my professional reputation on the line for you, I expect complete transparency moving forward. No more lies." He closed his eyes, letting out a massive breath of relief. He actually believed he had won. He believed his cheap bottle of wine and his pathetic act had secured him the ultimate corporate shield. "Thank you, Riley," he whispered. "You will not regret this, I promise." As I watched him walk back to the elevator, a cold, predatory smile crept across my face. He had no idea he had just officially invited his own executioner to the main event. The morning after my fake reconciliation with Connor, the real work began. While he was out shopping for a new custom tuxedo to wear to his investment gala, assuming his financial salvation was fully secured, Jasmine was quietly packing her entire life into cardboard boxes. I hired a private, discreet moving company to clear out her belongings from the luxury apartment she shared with him. It had to be done with surgical precision. We left the expensive furniture they had picked out together, taking only her personal files, her clothing, and the high-end electronics he had used to commit his crimes. Jasmine stood in the center of the expansive living room one last time, looking at the framed photos of their engagement vacation in Greece. She did not shed a single tear. She simply picked up a framed picture of the two of them smiling on a yacht, tossed it directly into the trash can, and walked out the door without looking back. She relocated to a secure corporate suite I owned downtown, completely cutting off all direct communication with him. Whenever he texted her, frantically begging to talk and asking why her closet was empty, she sent a brief automated response saying she was overwhelmed with work at Apex and needed space until the gala. He was so incredibly self-absorbed that he accepted the excuse without question, entirely focused on the millions he thought he was about to steal. He believed she was just being a difficult bride, never suspecting she was actively building a federal case against him. With Jasmine safely extracted from the blast radius, we shifted our focus to the digital execution. We sat in my private office with our lead cybersecurity technician finalizing the massive dossier we were going to present to the federal authorities. We did not just have circumstantial evidence. We had a bulletproof timeline that mapped out every single felony he committed over the past 2 months. We matched the exact timestamps of his illegal access to our corporate network with the outgoing wire fraud emails sent to our VIP clients. We included the predatory second mortgage documents signed by my mother, proving the desperate financial motive behind the massive scam. It was a complete, irrefutable package of corporate espionage, identity theft, and securities fraud. I placed the decrypted hard drive clones into a secure steel briefcase, feeling the heavy weight of what we were about to do. This was no longer just a bitter family dispute over a stolen college fund or a ruined dinner at the Waldorf. We were dealing with interstate wire fraud and severe violations of Federal Trading Commission regulations. I was about to trigger a legal avalanche that would bury my brother for years, and I felt absolutely no guilt. That afternoon, Jasmine and I walked through the heavy glass doors of the Federal Bureau of Investigation field office in Lower Manhattan. We were escorted into a stark, windowless conference room where 2 senior white-collar crime agents and a lead investigator from the Securities and Exchange Commission were waiting for us. They had reviewed the preliminary brief my corporate lawyers submitted that morning, but they needed to see the hard evidence. I placed the steel briefcase on the metal table and slid it across to the lead agent. Jasmine professionally walked them through the technical timeline, explaining exactly how Connor had bypassed her personal security to infiltrate the Apex network. The federal agents listened in absolute silence, their expressions hardening as the sheer scale of the fraud became apparent. Connor was actively targeting elite Wall Street investors with fabricated financial projections, using a stolen corporate identity to bypass their security measures and aggressively soliciting over $50 million in illegal capital. When the lead investigator saw the forged documents claiming active partnerships with Fortune 500 companies, he shook his head in absolute disbelief. It was an airtight criminal case handed to them on a silver platter. I explained that Connor was hosting a massive investment gala in exactly 3 weeks where he planned to formally collect the fraudulent investments on stage. The lead agent looked at me, closing the thick file folder with a sharp snap. He agreed that the high-profile gala was the absolute perfect opportunity to catch him in the undeniable act of soliciting the funds publicly. They would spend the next 3 weeks building the federal indictments, securing the necessary arrest warrants, and preparing a highly coordinated sting operation. As Jasmine and I walked out of the federal building and stepped back into the bustling New York streets, the cool autumn air felt incredibly refreshing. The trap was now fully set, the federal authorities were locked onto their target, and my arrogant brother was happily arranging the expensive catering for his own spectacular downfall. Connor was so entirely consumed by his own delusions of grandeur that he did not even realize his life was unraveling. When Jasmine refused to return his calls, he assumed she was just throwing a typical bridal tantrum. He sent her a few half-hearted texts, apologizing for the stress of his massive corporate launch, completely ignoring the reality that she had packed up her entire life and moved out. He spent his days touring luxury car dealerships, test-driving vehicles he planned to buy, with the $50 million he thought he was about to steal. Meanwhile, my mother Diane was busy playing the role of the proud matriarch, posting endless social media updates about her brilliant son, the tech visionary, desperately trying to ignore the ticking time bomb of her defaulted second mortgage. The evening before the investment gala finally arrived. The city outside my penthouse window was draped in the fading gold of an autumn sunset. I was standing in my massive walk-in closet, running my hand along the row of designer gowns, deciding exactly what one wears to a federal takedown. I did not want something flashy. I wanted something structured, sharp, and uncompromising. I finally settled on a tailored midnight blue silk suit. It was the armor of a woman who commanded respect, not the delicate dress of a submissive daughter. As I pulled the suit from its hanger, my personal cell phone buzzed on the velvet vanity. I walked over and picked it up. It was a text message from Diane. I had not spoken to her since she was physically escorted out of my corporate lobby, but clearly her anxiety about the impending foreclosure was overriding her pride. Riley, the message read, "Make sure you dress appropriately tomorrow night. Wear something understated and professional. Do not wear any of your expensive jewelry, and do not try to outshine your brother. He needs the venture capitalist to focus entirely on him and his software. This is his moment to become a millionaire and save our family. Do not ruin this for us." I stared at the glowing screen, a harsh, humorless laugh escaping my lips. Save our family. She was still pushing the narrative that Connor was the hero, completely ignoring the fact that he was the one who had driven them to the brink of absolute financial ruin. Even on the eve of his massive criminal exposure, she was still prioritizing his fragile ego over everything else. She genuinely believed that if I wore a dress that was too nice, I might distract the investors from handing him the money he needed to pay off her predatory loan. She was completely trapped in her own vanity, unable to see the massive federal freight train hurtling directly toward her. I sat down on the edge of the plush velvet ottoman, tapping my manicured fingernail against the edge of the phone case. I thought about the $60,000 college fund she stole from me. I thought about the $50 bill she shoved into my chest at the Waldorf Astoria. I thought about the vicious fabricated video she helped create to smear my professional reputation across the internet. She wanted me to shrink myself so her golden boy could shine. She wanted me to be small so she could feel big. I unlocked the phone and opened the keyboard. I did not write a paragraph explaining that I was not the enemy. I did not tell her that her son was a sociopathic fraud. I simply typed a single undeniable truth. I guarantee it will be an unforgettable night. I hit send, locked the screen, and tossed the phone onto the vanity. I poured myself a glass of expensive red wine, walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows, and looked out over the glittering Manhattan skyline. The storm was coming, and I was going to be the one bringing the thunder. The next evening, my chauffeured car pulled up to the grand entrance of the Ritz-Carlton. The air was electric, buzzing with the false promises of easy money. Photographers flanked the red carpet, their camera flashes illuminating the crisp autumn night. I stepped out the cool breeze, catching the sharp edges of my tailored midnight blue silk suit. I walked past the velvet ropes with a quiet, measured confidence. Inside the grand ballroom was a masterpiece of corporate theater. Crystal chandeliers hung suspended like frozen fireworks over hundreds of Wall Street elites, venture capitalists, and eager angel investors. Waiters in white tuxedo jackets circulated with silver trays of champagne. It was a multi-million-dollar stage built entirely on stolen code and a predatory second mortgage. I scanned the expansive room and immediately spotted Connor. He was standing near the front of the main stage, bathed in flattering spotlight. He wore a custom-tailored velvet tuxedo that screamed unearned wealth. He was aggressively schmoozing a circle of older distinguished investors, flashing his trademark charismatic smile and gesturing expansively with a highball glass. These were the very men whose portfolios he had attempted to hack using Jasmine's corporate credentials. He looked completely in his element, entirely convinced that his carefully constructed illusion was bulletproof. He had no idea that several of the waiters pouring champagne, and at least 3 of the affluent investors nodding at his pitch, were undercover federal agents waiting for my signal. Before I could even take a glass of champagne from a passing tray, a sharp manicured hand clamped tightly onto my elbow. I did not even have to turn around to know it was my mother. Diane dragged me roughly away from the main thoroughfare and into a dimly lit alcove near the coat check. She was wearing a heavily sequined gold gown that looked desperate rather than elegant, her hair sprayed into a rigid helmet of curls. The sheer panic vibrating off her was palpable. She looked me up and down, her expression souring as she took in the sharp, commanding lines of my midnight blue silk suit. "I told you to wear something understated," Diane hissed, her voice vibrating with toxic anxiety. "You look like you are going to a board meeting to fire someone. This is a celebration of your brother's genius, not a runway for your corporate vanity. Why can you never just blend in and support your family? You deliberately wore this to draw attention away from him." I stared at her, completely unfazed by her frantic energy. She was projecting her own terror onto me. In exactly 29 days, the bank was going to foreclose on her ancestral home, and her only hope was the smiling fraud currently working the room. "You are going to stay in the back row," she ordered, pointing a trembling finger toward the dimly lit tables near the exit doors. "Your table is all the way in the back. Do not speak to the investors. Do not hand out your business cards. Do not even look at the venture capitalists. Connor is about to secure $50 million tonight, and I will not let your bitter jealousy ruin the most important moment of his life. You are only here because he was gracious enough to invite you. So sit down, keep your mouth shut, and watch how a real success story is made." I looked at the trembling finger she pointed at my face. A profound sense of peace washed over me. I was not angry or hurt by her words. I was simply observing a tragic character rushing toward the end of her own play. I gently reached out and pushed her hand down. "You are absolutely right, Diane," I said, my voice smooth and perfectly calm. "The back row is exactly where I want to be. It provides the absolute best view of the entire stage." I would not miss a single second of this presentation for the world. Diane sneered, adjusting her gold-sequined shawl, believing she had successfully put me in my place. She turned on her heel and hurried back toward the front row to claim her seat of honor. I took a slow sip of my champagne and began making my way toward the back of the ballroom. I found my assigned table situated perfectly in the shadows near the heavy oak exit doors. I took my seat, placing my sleek clutch on the table. Inside the clutch was a secure digital tablet linked directly to the massive projector screens framing the stage. The federal agents had given me the honor of initiating the takedown. I leaned back in my chair, watching my brother step up to the podium, completely unaware that his audience was about to become his jury. The heavy crystal chandeliers above the ballroom dimmed, casting a warm glow over the crowd of affluent investors. A hush fell over the room as the ambient music faded. Connor stepped up to the acrylic podium positioned center stage. He adjusted the microphone with a practiced elegance, looking out over the tailored suits. A massive digital screen behind him displayed the fabricated logo of Horizon Dynamics. The audience erupted into polite applause, captivated by the illusion he had carefully constructed. Connor raised his hands, signaling for quiet, his face glowing with absolute triumph. "Thank you," he began, his voice echoing through the sound system. "Thank you all for being here tonight to witness the dawn of a new era in logistics technology." He launched into his presentation, weaving a masterful tale of innovation. He used all the right corporate buzzwords, talking about algorithmic efficiency and scalable artificial intelligence. He spoke with the conviction of a man who actually believed his own lies. I sat in the shadows at the back of the room, my fingers resting on the smooth surface of the digital tablet hidden inside my clutch. I watched him pace the stage, pointing to the fabricated growth charts displayed on the screen behind him. It was a flawless performance. If I had not seen the decrypted hard drive with my own eyes, I might have actually believed him. After 20 minutes of outlining his fake $50 million vision, Connor slowed his pacing. He leaned against the podium, adopting a tone of manufactured humility. "But none of this would be possible without the unwavering support of my family," he said, placing a hand over his heart. He gestured toward the front row where Diane and my father were sitting. "My parents believed in my vision from day one. They sacrificed everything to give me the foundation I needed to build this company." Diane beamed, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, playing the role of the proud mother to absolute perfection. The investors clapped respectfully, eating up the wholesome family narrative. Then Connor shifted his gaze. His eyes scanned the room, moving past the wealthy venture capitalists and undercover federal agents searching the dimly lit tables in the back. When he finally spotted me sitting quietly near the exit doors, a familiar, arrogant smirk curled the edges of his mouth. He leaned closer to the microphone. "We even have my older sister Riley here with us tonight," he announced, his voice dripping with condescension. "She is sitting all the way in the back. Let us give her a round of applause. She usually struggles to get out of her tiny apartment, but she finally came out to support some real success for a change. I guess seeing a multi-million-dollar company launch is a nice break from her freelance gigs." A wave of laughter rippled through the front rows. Diane let out a loud theatrical chuckle, leaning over to whisper something malicious to my Aunt Susan. The extended family joined in their laughter, echoing sharply in the massive ballroom. They were absolutely thrilled. This was the moment they had been waiting for. They thought Connor had finally proven his ultimate superiority, cementing my status as the eternal family failure in front of hundreds of elite guests. A few of the investors near the front turned around in their seats, craning their necks to catch a glimpse of the pathetic, struggling sister he was mocking. I felt the collective gaze of the room shift toward my table in the shadows. I did not shrink down in my chair. I did not look away or show a single ounce of embarrassment. I sat perfectly straight in my tailored midnight blue silk suit. I slowly picked up my crystal flute of champagne from the table. Maintaining direct eye contact with my brother standing under the bright stage lights, I raised the glass in the air. I offered him a cold, knowing smile. It was not a smile of defeat. It was the smile of a predator watching its prey wander blindly into a trap. Connor saw my smile and faltered for a fraction of a second, a brief flash of confusion crossing his features, before his massive ego smoothed it over. He assumed I was just trying to save face. He raised his glass toward me, sealing his fate, and turned back to the crowd. "Thank you again," Connor concluded. "Now I would like to invite someone very special to the stage, my brilliant fiancée and the future Chief Operating Officer of Horizon Dynamics. Jasmine is going to share our operational strategy." He began clapping loudly, looking toward the side of the stage, unaware that the woman he was introducing was about to detonate the bomb I handed her. Jasmine stepped out from the heavy velvet curtains at the side of the stage. She did not wear the soft romantic gown of a blushing bride. Instead, she was dressed in a razor-sharp, tailored white suit that commanded absolute authority. As she walked toward the center of the stage, the spotlight followed her. The rhythmic click of her heels against the polished hardwood echoed through the silent, expectant ballroom. Connor beamed with pride, completely oblivious to the cold, hard set of her jaw. He stepped back from the acrylic podium, presenting her to the room of elite investors as his ultimate prize. He leaned in as she approached, expecting a kiss on the cheek. Jasmine smoothly sidestepped him, not even acknowledging his presence. She stepped directly up to the microphone, placing a sleek silver tablet onto the podium. Connor brushed off the slight, maintaining his manufactured smile for the audience, assuming she was focused on delivering a flawless corporate endorsement. Jasmine looked out over the sea of 300 wealthy venture capitalists. She let a heavy, deliberate silence stretch across the grand ballroom. She made eye contact with the key players in the front rows, the very men and women Connor had targeted. Finally, she leaned into the microphone. "Connor is a remarkably charming man." Jasmine began, her voice ringing out crystal clear through the massive sound system. It was the calm tone of an executive delivering an earnings report. "He has a gift for making you believe in his vision. He can look you right in the eye and sell you a dream so vividly you almost forget to check the foundation it is built upon." A few polite chuckles rippled through the audience. Diane nodded enthusiastically from the front row, completely misinterpreting Jasmine's words as a compliment. Connor smiled wider, puffing out his chest. "Yes, he is incredibly charming," Jasmine continued, her tone dropping a fraction of an octave, losing all trace of warmth. "So charming, in fact, that he managed to steal my private corporate access codes in the middle of the night to illegally solicit every single one of you in this room." The polite smiles instantly vanished. The silence that fell over the Ritz-Carlton ballroom was not the quiet of anticipation. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of absolute shock. 300 of the most powerful financial minds in New York stopped breathing all at once. Connor froze. His smile remained plastered on his face for a split second, his brain completely short-circuiting as it tried to process what his fiancée had just broadcasted to the entire world. He let out a nervous, breathy laugh, stepping forward and reaching for the microphone. "Okay, honey, that is quite the icebreaker." Connor stammered, his voice trembling as he tried to forcibly grab the metal stand. "Let us get back to the logistics platform." Jasmine slammed her hand down on his wrist, stopping him dead in his tracks. She did not look at him. She kept her eyes locked entirely on the audience. "This is not a joke," Jasmine stated, her voice echoing with undeniable authority. "My name is Jasmine, and I am the Chief Operating Officer of Apex Crisis Management. The Horizon Dynamics logistics platform you were just pitched does not exist. The proprietary artificial intelligence code Connor spent the last 20 minutes bragging about is entirely fabricated. But more importantly, the reason you all received direct emails from him is because he illegally bypassed my personal security network and stole the encrypted VIP investor database belonging to my firm." The ballroom erupted. It was not a slow build. It was an instant, chaotic explosion of sound. Chairs scraped violently against the floor as several prominent investors stood up. Furious murmurs swept through the crowd like a wildfire. People pulled out their cell phones, scrolling through their inboxes to verify the fraudulent emails they had received. Diane leaped to her feet in the front row, her face twisting into a mask of pure horror, screaming at Jasmine to shut her mouth. Connor was hyperventilating. His charming tech founder facade had completely disintegrated, replaced by sheer, unfiltered terror. "Jasmine, stop!" he hissed, his eyes wide with genuine panic. "What are you doing? You are ruining everything. Turn off the microphone right now." He lunged toward the podium, desperately trying to physically rip the microphone cables out of the console. But Jasmine simply picked up the wireless microphone, stepping gracefully away from the podium and out of his reach. She stood center stage, a pillar of absolute strength, watching the golden boy squirm under the burning spotlight. "You asked for my operational strategy," Jasmine said, her voice cutting sharply through the rising chaos of the room. "My operational strategy is to never negotiate with criminals." Connor let out a guttural scream, a sound completely stripped of his usual polished charm. "Cut the microphone!" he shrieked, waving his arms frantically at the sound engineer in the technical booth positioned at the back of the room. "Cut her off right now! Security, get her off my stage!" The young sound engineer froze, his hands hovering over the mixing board. He looked back and forth between the frantic man on stage and the powerful woman standing firmly at the center, unsure of whose orders to follow. But Jasmine did not need the microphone anymore. She had already delivered the killing blow. She simply lowered the device, turned her back on Connor, and walked gracefully down the stage steps, parting the sea of shocked investors, who automatically moved aside to let her pass. Connor scrambled to the podium, gripping the edges so hard his knuckles turned white. "Do not listen to her!" he shouted into the microphone, his voice echoing with a shrill, desperate panic. "She is a disgruntled former employee. She is having a mental breakdown. Horizon Dynamics is the future. Let me show you the proprietary logistics interface right now." He frantically clicked the remote in his hand, trying to advance the slideshow to a demonstration video he had faked. That was my cue. Sitting in the shadows near the exit doors, I calmly unclasped my sleek clutch and pulled out the secure digital tablet. I bypassed the lock screen and opened the remote access application linked directly to the Ritz-Carlton audio-visual system. I did not need to shout. I did not need to make a scene. I just needed to press one single button on the screen. I pressed it. The giant projector screen behind Connor instantly flickered. The bright fabricated Horizon Dynamics logo vanished. The fake graphs depicting 400% growth were wiped away in a fraction of a second. In their place, a massive high-resolution image of a certified bank statement illuminated the entire ballroom. The account name clearly read, "Connor Personal Checking Account." Connor clicked his remote again, assuming the presentation had simply glitched. Nothing happened. He turned around to look at the massive screen, and I watched the last remaining ounce of blood drain from his face. Right in the center of the screen, highlighted in a bright, undeniable yellow box, was his total corporate revenue for the past 24 months. It read, $0. A collective gasp ripped through the audience of venture capitalists. Men and women who managed billions of dollars were staring at the literal definition of an empty shell company. But I was not finished. I tapped my tablet screen again, advancing the slide to the next piece of evidence. The screen shifted to show the massive incoming wire transfer of $500,000. The origin account was clearly labeled as a high-interest residential equity line of credit belonging to Diane and Robert. Next to that deposit was an itemized list of exactly where that money had gone. It had not gone to software developers. It had not gone to marketing. The screen displayed the undeniable truth. Tens of thousands of dollars transferred to a luxury exotic car dealership for the lease on his Porsche. Massive credit card payments for VIP bottle service and luxury suites at the Bellagio in Las Vegas. Exorbitant charges at custom Italian tailors in Manhattan. The investors were looking at a digital monument to pure greed. Connor had taken his parents' life savings, the equity of their ancestral home, and literally drank it away while pretending to be a tech genius. Liar, an older investor in the second row, bellowed, standing up and pointing a furious finger at the stage. You tried to sell us a Ponzi scheme funded by your mother. The ballroom erupted into absolute chaos. Investors were shouting, demanding the hotel lock the doors, screaming for the authorities. But the loudest scream of all came from the front row. Diane stood completely paralyzed, staring up at the massive screen. Her heavily sequined gold gown caught the harsh glare of the projector light. For the first time in her life, the protective delusion she had built around her golden boy entirely shattered. She was reading the itemized receipts of her own destruction. She saw the Vegas trips. She saw the car lease. She realized that the $500,000 loan she took out against the family home was entirely gone. It was not invested. It was wasted. There was no funding round that would save them. The balloon payment was due in 29 days, and they had absolutely nothing. Connor. Diane shrieked, her voice cracking with raw agony. What exactly did you do? Where is the money? He had completely destroyed them. Diane's scream cut through the heavy air, swallowed by the sheer volume of outrage erupting from 300 venture capitalists. The Ritz-Carlton ballroom transformed into a war zone. High-powered investors frantically pulled out cell phones, shouting into devices, ordering financial teams to freeze pending transfers to Horizon Dynamics. Others dialed their attorneys, demanding immediate legal action for the fraudulent emails. The polite applause was replaced by a deafening roar of betrayal. At the front, my mother completely lost her grip on reality. Diane was no longer a poised matriarch. She scrambled over the velvet ropes separating the front row from the stage, her high heels slipping on the polished hardwood floor. Instead of confronting her son, she turned her hysterical fury toward the terrified young sound engineer in the back booth. "Fix the screen," Diane screeched. "Turn it off. It is a mistake. My son is a tech genius. Someone hacked the system." But the sound engineer had already stepped away from the console, raising his hands in surrender, refusing to touch the equipment while a massive crime was exposed live. On the stage, Connor was unraveling at a terrifying speed. The slick, charming entrepreneur was gone, replaced by a cornered animal realizing the trap had completely snapped shut. His eyes darted wildly from the damning bank statements on the massive projector screen to the furious crowd below. He was sweating profusely, his custom velvet tuxedo suddenly looking like a cheap costume. His gaze locked onto Jasmine. She stood center stage, holding the microphone, radiating unbreakable strength. In his twisted mind, she was the sole reason his multi-million-dollar empire was crumbling. "Give me the microphone!" Connor bellowed, his voice cracking with a terrifying mix of panic and rage. He lunged toward her, his hands outstretched, aiming to physically rip the device from her grasp. He wanted to silence her and regain control, to scream more lies into the void. He never even reached her. I had already left my table in the shadows. I moved through the chaotic ballroom with deliberate speed, my dark blue suit cutting through the panicked crowd like a blade. I did not run. I marched. I climbed the short flight of stairs to the stage just as Connor lunged forward. Before his hands could even graze Jasmine, I stepped directly between them. I planted my feet firmly, squaring my shoulders, creating an impenetrable physical barrier between my brilliant chief operating officer and the pathetic fraud trying to intimidate her. Connor collided with me, staggering back as if he had hit a solid brick wall. He looked up, his chest heaving, his face contorted in shock as he realized who was standing in his way. "Riley," he gasped, stumbling backward. "What are you doing? Get out of the way. She is ruining my life." I stood my ground, my expression carved from pure ice. "She is not ruining your life, Connor," I said, my voice carrying no need for a microphone. My tone was low, deadly, and entirely steady. "You ruined your own life the second you decided to steal from my company." He blinked, the absolute truth struggling to penetrate his thick layer of delusion. "Your company," he repeated, his eyes darting frantically. "What are you talking about?" I took a slow, measured step toward him, forcing him to back away. "Who do you think hired the cybersecurity team to decrypt your hard drive?" I asked. watching his face drain of whatever color it had left. Who do you think mapped out the timestamps of your corporate espionage? Who do you think sat in the federal field office yesterday and handed the United States government the itemized receipts of your wire fraud? Connor shook his head side to side, unable to process the magnitude of the betrayal. No, he whispered. No, you promised. You said you were going to sign the representation contract. You drank wine with me. I did, I replied smoothly. I told you I would guarantee an unforgettable night, and I always keep my promises to my clients. You thought you could use Apex Crisis Management to shield your Ponzi scheme. But you forgot one crucial detail about crisis management. We do not just clean up messes, we eliminate the threats. You are the threat, Connor, and I am the one who pressed the button to destroy your presentation. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. His knees buckled slightly. The golden boy finally understood that the sister he had spent his entire life mocking and belittling was the absolute architect of his total destruction. The ballroom continued to rage around us, but on that stage in that specific moment, Connor was completely alone, stripped of his lies, his money, and his family shield. Before Connor could even attempt to formulate a pathetic excuse, a booming voice echoed from the back of the massive room, cutting through the frantic shouts of the investors. Federal agents, nobody move. Stay exactly where you are. The heavy oak doors of the Ritz-Carlton ballroom were violently pushed wide, slamming against the walls with a resounding crack. Everyone froze. The angry venture capitalists, the panicked hotel staff, and my hysterical mother all turned toward the entrance. They were expecting the hotel security team to intervene and break up a corporate dispute. Instead, a coordinated team of men and women wearing tactical vests bearing the bold yellow letters of the Federal Bureau of Investigation poured into the room. Flanking them were stern-faced investigators from the Securities and Exchange Commission, clutching thick black folders containing the exact digital dossiers Jasmine and I had provided. The lead agent, a tall, imposing man with eyes like chipped ice, marched directly down the center aisle. He did not look left or right. The crowd of billionaires and industry titans instantly parted for him, instinctively recognizing an authority that money simply could not buy. The heavy thud of tactical boots against the polished hardwood floor was the only sound in the room, beating like a grim drum roll, signaling the absolute end of the golden boy. Connor stood frozen on the stage, his mouth hanging open in a silent scream. His eyes darted from the approaching federal agents to me, his brain completely failing to comprehend the reality of his nightmare. He took one wobbly step backward, bumping into the acrylic podium. The microphone feedback let out a sharp, high-pitched squeal that made the audience flinch. The lead FBI agent reached the stage, taking the short flight of stairs 2 at a time. He bypassed Jasmine, he bypassed me, and walked straight up to my brother. Connor, the agent said, his voice hard and entirely devoid of sympathy. You are under arrest. The agent grabbed Connor by the shoulder, spinning him around with professional efficiency. Connor let out a high, panicked yelp completely devoid of his usual arrogance. He tried to pull his arm away, a useless reflexive gesture of a cornered coward. The agent did not hesitate. He forced Connor's arms behind his back. You are being charged with multiple counts of interstate wire fraud, identity theft, and corporate espionage, the agent stated, reciting the charges loudly enough for the entire ballroom to hear. He unclipped the steel handcuffs from his belt. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. The metallic click of the handcuffs snapping shut around Connor's wrists echoed sharply through the microphone still resting on the podium. It was the loudest, most definitive sound of the entire evening. That single sharp click severed every lie, every manipulation, and every delusion he had ever built. The physical reality of the cold steel against his skin finally broke him. The charming tech entrepreneur entirely vanished, leaving behind nothing but a terrified, pathetic little boy. Connor's knees gave out. He collapsed onto the stage floor, dragging the federal agent down with him for a brief second before two other agents rushed up to haul him back to his feet. He began to sob. It was not a quiet, dignified crying. It was a loud, ugly, breathless wailing. Tears streamed down his face, ruining his expensive grooming, snot running into his mouth as he gasped for air. "Mom," he screamed, twisting his head wildly to look for Diane in the front row. "Mom, please help me. Do not let them take me. Tell them it is a mistake." He was 30 years old, wearing a custom velvet tuxedo, begging for his mommy in front of 300 Wall Street elites. He turned his red, tear-soaked face toward me. "Riley, please," he begged, his voice cracking with pure desperation. "I am your brother. I am sorry. I will give the money back. Just tell them to stop. Please, Riley." I stood completely motionless, watching the federal agents tighten their grip on his arms. I felt absolutely nothing for him. No pity, no regret, no lingering sense of family obligation. I simply looked down at the sobbing mess of a man who had stolen my future to buy himself a sports car, who had mortgaged our parents' home to buy a fake empire, and who had tried to destroy my company just yesterday. "You have the right to remain silent, Connor," I said, my voice cold and flat, cutting through his hysterical sobbing. "I highly suggest you finally use it." The agents grabbed him by the shoulders and began frog-marching him across the stage. His expensive leather shoes dragged against the hardwood floor as he went completely limp, sobbing uncontrollably. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the FBI escorted the golden child out of the ballroom, his wails echoing down the hotel corridor, until the heavy oak doors finally swung shut, sealing his fate entirely, and leaving behind the total wreckage of his non-existent empire. The heavy oak doors sealed shut, leaving behind the total wreckage of his non-existent empire. The massive Ritz-Carlton ballroom remained frozen in a state of absolute shock for a few seconds before the chaotic murmuring resumed. High-powered venture capitalists shook their heads in disbelief, gathering their expensive coats and briefcases, eager to distance themselves from the toxic fallout of the evening. Jasmine stepped down from the stage, giving me a silent, respectful nod before walking out the side exit to coordinate with the remaining federal agents in the lobby. I stood alone at the center of the stage, the bright spotlight still illuminating the space where my brother had just been publicly destroyed. Before I could even turn to leave, a frantic scrambling sound echoed from the short flight of stairs leading up to the platform. It was Diane. My mother had completely lost whatever shred of dignity she had left. Her heavily sequined gold gown was torn at the hem, and her rigid helmet of curls had entirely collapsed around her tear-streaked face. She practically crawled onto the stage, her high heels abandoned somewhere in the front row. She lunged forward, throwing her weight against my legs and frantically grabbing the fine fabric of my midnight blue silk suit. "Riley, you have to do something!" Diane shrieked, her voice raw and hoarse, echoing painfully through the massive room. Her fingernails dug desperately into my tailored trousers. "You have to fix this right now. Call your corporate lawyers. Tell them it was all a massive misunderstanding. You have millions of dollars. You can afford the best legal team in the state. You have to bail him out." I looked down at the woman who had birthed me, the woman who had spent my entire life making me feel like a worthless burden. I did not try to pull away. I simply stood there, an unmoving pillar of absolute resolve. "He committed federal wire fraud, Diane." I stated, my voice completely flat, devoid of any sympathy or warmth. "He stole corporate assets and tried to scam half of Wall Street. There is no misunderstanding. He is going to federal prison." Diane shook her head violently, tears pouring down her cheeks, smearing her expensive makeup into dark, ugly streaks. "No, he is just a boy," she sobbed, completely delusional to the bitter end. "He just made a little mistake because he was under so much pressure. You cannot let them lock him up in a cage." "And the house? Riley. What about the house?" Her grip on my clothes tightened as the reality of her own impending doom finally crashed over her. "The balloon payment is due in 29 days, she wailed, her voice breaking into a pathetic high-pitched whine. "You saw the bank statements on the screen. The money is entirely gone. The bank is going to foreclose on the property. Your father and I will be thrown out onto the street. We will have absolutely nothing." She looked up at me, her eyes wide with a terrifying, predatory desperation. "You are rich!" she screamed, shaking my legs, as if she could physically force the money out of me. "I saw your office. I saw your clothes. You have millions sitting in your bank accounts while we are about to lose everything. You have to write a check tonight. You have to pay off the mortgage and save the family home. You have to save us. We are your blood." The sheer audacity of her demand hung heavily in the cool, air-conditioned air of the ballroom. She was not apologizing for stealing my $60,000 college fund. She was not apologizing for handing me a $50 bill and kicking me out of a hotel just weeks ago. She was not even apologizing for the vicious video she posted online to ruin my professional reputation. She still believed that because we shared the same genetics, I was obligated to sacrifice my hard-earned success to shield her from the consequences of her own toxic choices. I stared down into her desperate, tearful eyes. I let the silence stretch between us for a long, agonizing moment, allowing her to truly feel the absolute weight of her powerlessness. For 33 years, she had wielded family loyalty like a blunt weapon, using it to bludgeon me into submission, while actively funding the golden child who ultimately destroyed her. "You placed every single bet you had on him," I said softly, my words cutting through the dead air like a razor blade. "You drained my account, you remortgaged the ancestral home, and you enabled a criminal. Now you are bankrupt and completely alone. I am not writing you a check, Diane. I will never save you. Ever." Diane released her grip on my trousers as if the silk had suddenly caught fire. She slumped back onto her heels, her tear-streaked face twisting into a grotesque mask of betrayal and incomprehension. For her entire life, she had operated under the absolute certainty that family ties were a magical currency she could cash in whenever she faced the consequences of her own terrible decisions. She looked up at me, her mouth opening and closing wordlessly, trying to find the specific sequence of words that would guilt me back into submission. But the old buttons she used to press no longer worked. The wiring had been completely ripped out. My father, Robert, finally emerged from the chaotic, frightened crowd. He shuffled to the edge of the stage, looking 20 years older than he had just an hour prior. His shoulders were slumped and his hands trembled as he looked at the massive projector screen still displaying his impending financial ruin. "Riley, please," he croaked, his voice lacking any of the authoritarian bite it used to hold. "You cannot do this to your mother. We are your parents. We gave you everything we had." I shifted my gaze to him, feeling the same cold detachment. "You did not give me everything, Robert," I corrected him, my voice carrying across the empty space between us. "You gave Connor everything. You stood by silently 10 years ago when she drained my college fund. You nodded along when she called me a failure. You co-signed the second mortgage to fund a criminal enterprise because you wanted the prestige of having a tech billionaire for a son. You made your investments. Now you get to live with the returns." Seeing that my father was completely ineffective, Diane's despair instantly morphed back into the vicious, venomous rage that defined her true character. She scrambled to her feet, pointing a trembling finger right at my face. "You are a monster!" she spat, her voice vibrating with pure malice. "You planned this. You deliberately humiliated us in front of all these important people just to satisfy your own sick, jealous ego. You are no daughter of mine. I should have never let you into this hotel. You have completely embarrassed this family." I stood perfectly still, letting her toxic words wash over me without absorbing a single drop of their poison. I looked at her ruined designer gown, her ruined reputation, and the ruined life she had built on a foundation of lies and favoritism. This was the exact moment I had waited for. This was the closure I had earned. I took one step closer to her, lowering my voice, so only she and my father could hear the absolute finality in my tone. "Like you said, Mom," I whispered, ensuring every single syllable landed with maximum impact. "I would not want to embarrass this family. Diane flinched as she recognized her own words from the Waldorf Astoria, being used as the final nail in her coffin. "You bet everything you had on your golden boy." I continued, my eyes locked onto hers, refusing to let her look away. "You stole my future to buy his affection. You leveraged your home to buy his lies. You wanted him to be the sole face of this family's success. Well, he is the face of it now. Now pay the price." I did not wait for her to respond. I did not give her the satisfaction of another screaming match or another desperate plea. I simply turned my back on her. The physical act of turning around felt like dropping a massive boulder I had been carrying on my shoulders for 33 years. I walked across the stage, my head held high, my footsteps entirely steady and resolute. I walked slowly down the short flight of stairs and stepped back down onto the main floor of the grand ballroom. The remaining wealthy investors and the terrified hotel staff immediately parted from me in absolute silence, watching the woman, who had just single-handedly dismantled a massive, sprawling federal fraud operation and severed a toxic bloodline with ruthless efficiency. I did not look back at the stage. I did not look back at the projector screen displaying the stolen funds. I did not look back at the parents who were currently sinking into the abyss of their own making. I walked straight through the heavy oak double doors of the Ritz-Carlton ballroom and stepped out into the quiet, brightly lit lobby. The air outside the ballroom felt incredibly crisp and wonderfully light. For the first time in my entire life, I was completely untethered from the heavy, suffocating chains of their expectations and their constant abuse. I took a long, deep breath, knowing that I was finally and completely free. The autumn chill gave way to a bitter winter, and as the snow covered the streets of Manhattan, the legal avalanche I had triggered finally buried my family. The federal justice system is notoriously slow, but when it possesses a decrypted hard drive full of stolen corporate data, itemized wire fraud receipts, and a dozen angry Wall Street billionaires demanding blood, it moves with absolute crushing certainty. Over the next several months, the grand illusion they had spent a lifetime building was systematically dismantled piece by piece. By late February, Connor's delusions of grandeur were officially reduced to a stack of bleak court documents. He had initially tried to plead not guilty. He was arrogant enough to believe his practiced charm could somehow sway a federal judge the way it had always swayed our mother. But his exhausted public defender quickly explained the brutal reality of his situation. The Securities and Exchange Commission had sworn affidavits from 30 elite venture capitalists. The Federal Bureau of Investigation had the exact digital timestamps of his corporate espionage on Jasmine's computer. Facing a potential 20-year sentence if he dared to take the case to a jury trial, the golden boy finally broke. He signed a comprehensive plea agreement. The judge sentenced him to 5 years in a federal penitentiary, followed by massive financial restitution he would never be able to pay. I did not attend his sentencing hearing. I simply read the short, buried paragraph in the business section of the morning paper while sipping my coffee. The headline did not mention a tech visionary or a brilliant entrepreneur. It simply referred to him as a convicted fraudster. He traded his custom velvet tuxedos and leased Porsches for a standard-issue khaki uniform locked away in a concrete cell where his unearned entitlement meant absolutely nothing. The brother who had mocked my work ethic was now earning 30 cents an hour scrubbing cafeteria floors. While Connor was being processed into the federal prison system, Diane and Robert were facing an entirely different kind of incarceration. The 30-day grace period on their predatory second mortgage expired exactly when the bank said it would. Without the $50 million miracle from the fake logistics company, they had absolutely no way to make the massive balloon payment. The foreclosure was swift, clinical, and utterly merciless. The bank did not care that the sprawling colonial house had been in our family for 3 generations. They only cared about the defaulted contract Diane had foolishly signed. On a freezing Tuesday morning, a team of bank-hired contractors arrived to change the locks, placing a bright yellow foreclosure notice on the heavy mahogany front door. The neighbors who had once envied my parents now watched from behind their expensive curtains as the mighty fell. Diane and Robert were forced to pack whatever belongings they could fit into a cheap, rented moving truck. The antique furniture, the expensive art pieces Diane used to brag about, and the grand dining table where they had hosted countless pretentious dinner parties were all seized and auctioned off to cover their remaining debts. They were forced to relocate to a tiny, damp two-bedroom rental apartment on the outskirts of a declining industrial town, miles away from the affluent Connecticut suburb they had ruled for decades. The apartment smelled of stale smoke. The linoleum floors were peeling and the walls were paper-thin, but the loss of their physical wealth was not their greatest punishment. Their true torment was the absolute social exile. The investment gala at the Ritz-Carlton had been a spectacular, highly public implosion. Word spread through their elite social circles faster than a wildfire. The prestigious country club immediately revoked their membership, citing a strict zero-tolerance policy for financial misconduct and public scandal. The wealthy friends Diane used to gossip with at charity luncheons suddenly stopped returning her calls and blocked her number. When she walked down the aisle of the discount grocery store, she was now forced to shop at people she had known for 20 years, would deliberately turn their shopping carts around to avoid making eye contact. They were completely ostracized, treated like contagious carriers of a terminal financial disease. The arrogant matriarch, who had once commanded a room with a single sharp look, was now a local pariah trapped in a cramped, depressing apartment with a husband who openly resented her, and a golden son who was calling collect from a federal prison block. They had sacrificed everything to maintain an illusion of superiority, and they were left with absolutely nothing. While their world shrank into a cold, isolated box of bitter regret, my world expanded in ways I had once only dared to imagine. 3,000 miles away from the freezing winters and the suffocating judgments of the East Coast, the warm Pacific breeze swept through the open sliding glass doors of a stunning Malibu beach house. The sun was beginning its slow, spectacular descent over the ocean, casting a brilliant golden hour glow across the expansive wooden deck. I stood at the glass railing holding a flute of sparkling cider, listening to the vibrant sound of genuine laughter echoing from the massive living room behind me. We were celebrating the end of the fourth quarter. Apex Crisis Management had not just survived the highly public Ritz-Carlton takedown, we had completely dominated because of it. The corporate world had watched me ruthlessly dismantle a massive federal fraud without a single flinch, even when the criminal standing on the stage was my own brother. That level of uncompromising ice-cold integrity became our ultimate undeniable marketing campaign. Fortune 500 companies flooded our phone lines, desperate to retain the agency that absolutely refused to compromise the truth for anyone. We had just closed our most profitable year in the entire history of the firm, expanding our offices globally. I turned around and looked at the crowd gathered inside the beautiful sunlit house. It was a carefully curated group of phenomenal people. There were no toxic relatives demanding unearned favors. There were no arrogant tech founders peddling lies or demanding a free ride. Instead, the room was filled with our most trusted colleagues, brilliant industry peers, and fiercely loyal friends. At the center of the room stood Jasmine. She looked absolutely radiant in a flowing white summer dress, laughing loudly at a story one of our lead analysts was telling. She was no longer the wounded woman betrayed by a con artist. She had channeled that devastating personal experience into pure corporate dominance, stepping up as my equal partner in the firm. She had also found a new wonderful partner who valued her brilliant mind instead of trying to secretly exploit it. She was safe, she was loved, and she was wildly successful. Watching Jasmine smile, surrounded by people who genuinely cared for her, a profound sense of clarity washed over me. For the first 33 years of my life, I had been force-fed the toxic narrative that biological family was the ultimate unbreakable bond. I was taught from a young age that sharing a bloodline meant you had to tolerate endless psychological abuse, sacrifice your own potential, and constantly set yourself on fire just to keep them warm. I had spent decades trying to prove my worth to parents who were biologically incapable of recognizing it, always hoping that one day I would finally be good enough. But standing here on this beautiful deck, surrounded by the thriving empire I built with my own 2 hands, I finally understood the absolute truth. True family is not a random accident of genetics. Blood simply dictates who you happen to be related to, but loyalty, respect, and mutual care dictate who your real family is. True family is made up of the people who stand firmly by your side when the absolute worst truths are exposed. They are the ones who help you shred the fake business plans, who hand you the microphone when it is time to speak up, and who hold the line with you when the entire room turns hostile. They celebrate your victories without a single ounce of jealousy. I took a slow, deep breath of the salty ocean air, feeling the lingering ghosts of my past finally dissolve into the crashing waves below. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt for walking away from Diane, Robert, and Connor. Leaving them in the wreckage of their own making was not an act of cruelty. It was an act of radical self-preservation. I had amputated a diseased, rotting limb so the rest of my body could finally survive and grow. If there is one thing I have learned from navigating the darkest corners of corporate crisis and toxic family dynamics, it is that you are never obligated to fund your own destruction. Do not let anyone use the word family as a heavy weapon to keep you small, compliant, or silent. When toxic people realize they can no longer control you, they will desperately try to control how others perceive you. Let them talk. Let them spin their pathetic narratives and play the victim. Your absolute best defense against a smear campaign is your own undeniable massive success. You hold the pen to your own life story. If the characters in your current chapter are actively trying to tear you down, you have the absolute power to write them out completely. Walk away from the tables where respect is no longer being served. Build your own empire. Gather the people who genuinely clap for your victories, and never apologize for protecting your peace. The house of cards will always inevitably collapse, but the fortress you build on undeniable truth will stand forever.